Welcome back to another exciting episode on the show. It's been a pleasure having you guys on, and I'm always excited to be with my audience on the show. And you guys know we only bring special guests to the show. Like I said, we will always bring the top 1% of guest authors on the show. And once again, today we have a very special guest. Our guest today is an author, technologist, storyteller, whose work ranges from best-selling Haggadah parodies to one of the most remarkable World War II memoirs you will ever encounter. His latest book, Zaidy's War, preserves the extraordinary true story of his grandfather, a man who survived unimaginable hardship during World War II, serving under four different armies, witnessing some of history's most pivotal battles, escaping starvation, poison, and even the threats of cannibalism. He ultimately walked nearly 1,600 miles home before building a new life in Israel and later the United States. What began as a series of interviews became a 19-year journey to honor a legacy of resilience, faith, survival, and hope. Martin, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dominic, so much for having me and for that lovely introduction. Certainly, it whets the appetite for your listeners as to what's about to unravel. But yes, my grandfather was an unbelievable person who has an unbelievable survival story, and I was very privileged to get the story from him before he passed on and put it into this book I'm holding before me, Zaidy's War. And the flags on the cover represent his journey through the 6 years of war and afterwards. And it's quite the story. Thank you very much for having me on your show this evening. Appreciate the time.
Right. Thank you so much, Martin Bodek. Looking at the book, I saw different flags. So I saw United States, I saw Belgium, right? That was Belgium. I think there's Vietnam, also China. So, tell us about your relationship with your grandfather and why you felt his story had to be preserved.
So the relationship was a very loving relationship that I had with my grandfather. We were very close. I spent a lot of time in his house. And when I was very young, very, very young indeed, 6, 7, or 8, he told me about his war experience. And I was way too young to absorb and to understand such devastation. And in my young man's mind, the gears started turning with what my future should be. And I knew I was going to be a storyteller, or at the very least, I was going to tell my grandfather's story, because most of the war stories that people in my circles are familiar with are the concentration camp survival story. And if it's not that, then escaping on the run or making it across the English Channel to England and surviving in place or escaping before the war. But this was completely different. And I knew even then, even as a young man, something unique is being held here. And I've written 14 books to date. I'm working on several more. And I really think that my grandfather was that initial spark, the match, and that lit the fuse that set me on this track to writing this book and many others. But this is probably the most important book I've ever written and possibly could write. Of course, nobody knows the future, but as it stands right now, I don't think I've produced a more important work than this one.
All right. So what first inspired you to begin interviewing your grandfather?
So I had not written my first book until about 2010. And before then, I wanted to get going. And I knew that the only way I could write a book of the quality that this demanded, I had to get the gears going. So well before I ever published my first book, my mother, and my mother sat down with my grandfather, and we obtained his story. We sat down, I remember, on several successive Thursday nights and just walked through the whole story with him. And as soon as he started kind of repeating himself, we realized that we have the entire story. And the story was placed on the shelf. And the conversation took place in 2003, 7 years before I published my first book. Then I started publishing my books, becoming more and more familiar with the industry and signing a few contracts and gaining success. And as soon as I felt a certain threshold of competence, I pulled the conversation that we had with my grandfather off of the shelves. It was all on VHS cassettes. Some of your listeners may know what VHS is, some not. But I took that conversation and my notepad and everything related that I put together and started to translate the conversation from Yiddish. I speak Yiddish fluently into English, and that itself was a 2-year process. So, first thing that had to happen was that I would become a writer, and once that was in place, and I was a good writer at the very least, then I could proceed with publishing this book. And it was 19 years from the interview until the publication date, which is a long time. 19 years. So every step of it was a labor of love. So that is how this book came to be. But certain pieces had to fall in place first before this one became a reality.
Martin, so why did this project take 19 years from the first interview to publication?
Why the 19 years?
Why did this project take 19 years from the
Well,
first interview?
Okay, so the interview was 2003, and I wasn't officially a writer. It would be another 7 years before I would actually become one. And even with that one, it was self-published. That was my first book. I wrote a parody of the second Bush administration. He was a biblical kind of chatty figure. So I wrote like a King James version of the presidency. It was a silly attempt at trying to make something happen. Not many people were interested, but it was the first foray. And in 2019 was when I actually signed my first contract. And once that happened, the ball started rolling faster and faster and faster. And as I mentioned, as soon as I reached a level of confidence and competence, then I could finally put this together. And once that happened, then we started getting the ball rolling, 2 years to translate. And very soon after that, we actually published the book. So of those 19 years, 7 were just laying there fallow, waiting for something to happen. And then another 9 years for me to actually sign my first writing contract of any kind. So the 19 years mostly were waiting for my skills to get to a certain place where a quality book could be produced. I did not want to publish this unless it was a solid, excellent quality product. And I believe I published it at the right time. Of course, it's a little sad that it was published about 8 years after my grandfather passed, but I really didn't have the skills and the chops to have brought it to fruition any earlier.
Okay, thank you so much,
Sure.
Martin. So, your grandfather survived unimaginable circumstances, including the threat of cannibalism. Why was that chapter so significant in this story, in his story?
You're asking why that particular part was as significant as it was?
Yes.
So you've gone right to the grisliest and most alarming part of his entire survival story. He survived, as you mentioned at the introduction, several other hardships, really difficult, near poisoning, death all around him, Soviet bullets, and all different sorts of madness. But his at a certain point, I should set up the scene. So he first served the Romanian army on a year commission just to build public works and do menial labor. Then he became a Hungarian soldier because Hungary annexed the part of his neighborhood in Romania, and everyone in that particular region became a Hungarian citizen overnight. And so he was redrafted again for a year, and that's how he got the two armies. That is the subtitle of the book: Four Armies, Three Continents, Two Brothers, One Man's Impossible Story of Endurance. Then the Germans came and selected him and dragged him off to Operation Barbarossa. Again, as you capably said in your introduction, he was present for some of the most amazing set pieces of war. Operation Barbarossa was the largest land invasion in human history, and probably will be for all time, because wars aren't fought the way they were fought in World War II. Wars are now basically drones, just drone warfare from one side to the other doing battle. That's how Ukraine and Russia are going at it in the current age, and that's how basically armies battle each other. And he was present. So his job was to dig foxholes on the front lines for the Germans as they were trying to invade Russia. And that is how he got caught with the Third Army. And finally, he escaped from this theater of war and was caught by the Russian army once he tried to transfer himself to the other side. So at one moment, he is on one side of the war, and literally in the next moment, he is on the other, which is just an unbelievable thing to pull off, and just the strangest thing even to happen to a person. But the Soviets brought him to a military camp where he performed menial labor, basically served the troops, brought them water and firewood and their clothes and so forth and so on, and helped them prepare for their war against the Axis. And from his first Soviet military camp, he was transferred to a Soviet camp in the Arctic Circle. Now, in this scenario, the Germans were working on, as we mentioned, invading Russia, and part of what of their strategy was to cut off the supply lines to Moscow, meaning whatever they can sever would be successful for the enemy if they could starve the Russians out of their capital city, and they were successful in doing so. They cut off the supply lines to Russia, and Russia starved to Moscow, and Moscow starved for a couple of days. Now, this camp where my grandfather was stationed was in between the German encampment and the city of Moscow, and therefore anything in between got cut off as well. Now, there wasn't much food to begin with that could be had on a daily basis, and to have the meager rations cut off obviously put my grandfather's life in peril, and everyone else's life in peril who was there with him in this military encampment. And to answer your question as to why this is the signal moment of my grandfather, it's because at this moment he proved himself to be a man of principle. Now, obviously, in survival situations, there's all different sorts of flexibilities and accommodations that one can afford themselves. But when you have no food, and all that is available is alternate fare, and not to get too frightening or off-putting or macabre, but one of the fascinating circumstances is that, as you can imagine, in sub-zero temperatures where you don't see sunlight for 6 months, because they were this close to the Arctic Circle, the ground is frozen. It's permafrost. It's tundra, meaning you could not dig holes in it, and therefore it meant that anyone who died in this camp could not be buried, which means that in the instance, or in the case where food is completely cut off, the alternate version of sustenance is readily available. It just needs to be dealt with in an appropriate and safe and hygienic manner as possible by the cooks, by the chefs in the kitchen. And they prepared this. And they fed it to the people in the camp. My grandfather refused. He would not partake in any such thing. And what's fascinating about my grandfather's experience is that he was always extremely careful to find himself a few more calories, certainly to have a few more than the person next to him, so he could be stronger and prove his worth and be of use and of value. So he was strong throughout the war, and well kept, and he looked after himself very well. But when the food was cut off and all that was available was this forbidden fare, he refused and was willing actually to give up his life based on this principle. Now, a fascinating thing happened when he showed up in this camp in the first place. He found that his best friend was the head chef in the kitchen, who had managed to arrive in this Soviet military camp much in the same way that my grandfather did, with all the hops that he did to get there. He was just seemed to have been 2 months ahead of my grandfather. So when he arrived, he was there. And he was able not just to forage for food for himself, but also get some help from his friend in the kitchen, who was always looking out for him and getting him those few extra calories that he was always after and always needed. So when all that was available was forbidden food, my grandfather's friend prepared food for him in a dignified and presentable manner, but my grandfather continued to refuse and started to starve to death, literally. And my grandfather's friend was very concerned for him. And under pain of death, under the threat of death, he snuck over to the Soviet barracks side where the soldiers were, and snuck a few morsels of regular food that he could for him, and gave it to my grandfather. And he told him very clearly that this was an exception. He wasn't going to do this every single day, and at some point he would, unless the supply lines are recast, have to eat from this forbidden stuff. So that was the last on the matter, because a day later the supply lines were indeed recast, and regular food was made available again. Of course, not in great quantities, but did become available again. So my grandfather was so principled that he would be willing to give up his life for it. And what's amazing about this is that he worked so hard to keep himself alive, doing the proper things all day and all the time, making the proper decisions and getting the right foods and few extra calories. But for this, he would not bend. He would give up his life. And to be the grandson of a man, this principle is highly, highly, highly inspiring. I should never find myself in a situation like this, but I think I have enough of my grandfather flowing through me that I would make the important moral decisions that would be necessary for me to make. That's a long-winded way of saying, of showcasing how manifestly important this was in my instruction as a young man, and just as a part of the story, just in general, to understand what he was subjected to and what he withstood as part of his survival story.
Okay, Martin. So your grandfather served under 4 different armies during World War II. Can you explain how that happened and the different armies he served on?
Sure. So as I illuminated just moments ago, I'll try to unpack it a little more. So he was minding his own business. He was about 20 years of age, and this was about 1938, and he received the draft card. So this draft card said to report for duty for the Romanian army. Romania at the time was partnered with the German nation, not rounding up Jews or killing them. That's not what was happening at this moment in time, but they were providing logistical support because Germany was indeed intent and hell-bent on invading Russia. So Romania helped with this cause, and they built public works for them: tarmacs, scaffolds, transportation, enabling conveyances. Excuse me, I need a drink. And so forth. And so basically my grandfather was a handyman, construction worker, just building these kinds of stuff to enable the movement of German troops. And he did this for a full year. And that's army number one. Army number two is the Hungarian army because in 1940-41, Hungary, again working in concert with Germany, annexed the northwestern part of Romania, and that area turned its citizens overnight from Romanian citizens into Hungarian citizens. So my grandfather had finished his work for the Romanian army. He had gone home to do his thing, and all of a sudden he got a new draft card, and this draft card said to report for duty for the Hungarian army, and this is army number two. And he worked there for a few months when the Germans came along, selected the strongest of the group. My grandfather realized, and that was a clue as to what he might get himself involved in. And once he was with the Germans, he was now with Army number three. He was sent to the front lines of Operation Barbarossa, where he dug foxholes for the German troops as part of their assault on the Soviet Union. And again, this is Army number three. At some point, my grandfather had grown weary of watching people die to the left and to the right of him as the Soviets fired upon their assault that was coming in their direction. And my grandfather had had enough of this. He knew he wasn't going to survive any longer, took advantage of a moment where he could escape and make his way for freedom, and he did so. He escaped with a friend of his. He called him his Czech friend. I think he befriended him in this position where he was. I don't have the name of the friend. I don't have it recorded in the book, but he seemed to have been a lucky fellow, just like my grandfather, and always making the proper decisions, whether he was lucky in making the right decisions or that was intentional. And he escaped, and he started rummaging through the Russian countryside, begging for food everywhere, and relying on the kindness of strangers. When my grandfather describes the moment where he was captured by the Soviet Union, he said he was with his head inside of a garbage can, rummaging for food, and then all of a sudden, as he lifted his head up, he found that he was staring down the barrel of a gun, quite literally. And this Russian or Soviet soldier dumped him into a convoy, and he was shipped right off to a camp, to a military camp somewhere in the Black Sea, where he served the troops. And this is how he got involved with Army number 4. From there, he was transferred north to the Arctic Circle to a camp called Khrinor. He remembers the name. It was in a city called Kierovsky Oblast, where he performed pretty much the same function, basically serving the troops and also sawing wood every day. Every day they would send him out of the camp, and he would saw down large trees and dump them into the river, where they'd go down to a sawmill downriver, where they'd be chopped up, and the wood would be sold to Soviet citizens, and the proceeds would go to pay for the continued defense of the Allies against the Axis. And this is how he found himself with Army number 4, and he did this over a span of 6 years, and that is how you get to 4. Whenever I speak in public about this, I ask, has anybody here served in the military? And sometimes I get, hands that are put up, and has anybody served too? So every once in a while I get 2 hands, because that's what happens. It's called a lone soldier, right? Somebody's impassioned enough about his heritage. For example, there are people, American citizens now, who proudly serve the American army, who have signed up to battle on behalf of Ukraine against the Russian invasion. And this is called the lone soldier. And that is pretty much how you can get to 2 military commissions in a single lifetime. So my grandfather managed somehow to get 4. It's pretty unheard of to serve 4 armies in a lifetime, but somehow my grandfather found himself in this wild situation. So yes, it was very important that I added the 4 armies subtitle to the book, which was, by the way, an 11th hour edition by the publisher. She said somehow it has to be known that 4 armies was part of the whole deal, and so we put it on there. And so, in answer to your question, this is how a person gets to serve four armies in the in the nutshelliest nutshell that could possibly be. So that's how it happened.
Okay. Thank you so much, Martin. I wish
You bet.
a grandfather that would tell me lots of stories like yours did. So, if your grandfather could see Zaidy's war today, what do you think he would say?
So interesting. I, my grandfather shared compliments in a very interesting way. He would not compliment you to your face. He would, if he was proud of anyone for accomplishing anything, he would speak to a family member, compliment them, and trust that that family member would transfer the compliment to the person that he was proud of. So I'm a marathon runner, right? For example, and he never mentioned to me directly that he was proud of what I was doing. I've run the New York City Marathon a few times, but what he did do is speak to my mother, tell her how proud he is of me for running, and trust that my mother would relay the information to me. So if my grandfather was alive, and if he was there at when the book was launched, he would probably do the same thing. He'd probably go to my mom and he'd say Martin did a good job with the book, and he would trust that my mother would relay the information to me. That is absolutely how that would play out. I have no question that that would be how it would happen.
So your grandfather would not like to compliment you to your face.
Yeah, it was an interesting quirk. I don't know what's behind it. If there's something, if about his war experience that didn't allow him to do so, some sort of way that he was brought up. But it's just an interesting human quirk. We all have our idiosyncrasies and the weird things that we do and the weird things that bother us and the ways that we interact with the universe. And that was one particular way that he interacted with people, and it was fine because he would make sure to let you know somehow that he was proud of what you were doing. Like he wouldn't withhold completely. He would just tell somebody else. It's just a very very funny human thing. It's a unique way of going about one's business.
All right. Thank you so much,
You bet.
Martin. So, what questions do you wish you had asked while he was still alive?
So when I interviewed him, I was a young man, and I did not ask the the thought process questions of him concerning his war experience. Why did you do this, and what were you thinking when that happened? And I didn't get into the inner turmoil kinds of things. I The book is basically a recording of everything that happened, and I also try to give an imagery and a placement of the political situations that put him in each of the places that he found himself. So I did not have the maturity, I think, to ask him these deep probing questions. But I also realized, we should not have regrets during our lifetimes. It's not a healthy way to live. But I did realize that when I pushed a little bit on those kinds of questions, he would not be very comfortable revealing them. Like he did not want to give fully his thought process. So on the one hand, I wasn't mature enough to ask, and the other, when I did, I got a little bit of resistance. So I really couldn't penetrate that deeply. Nevertheless, I'm very pleased with the final product. I'm very proud of what I put together, and it's a full story. It's a whole story. It just doesn't have the inner dialogue of his struggles. Like I don't know how he flowcharted his decisions, each of his survival decisions, especially. I just know what happened. So, do I wish I could go back and ask him a little more? Yeah, just a little bit. But I'm still happy with the result of the book.
Okay. Thank you, Martin. So,
Mhm.
in what ways do you see pieces of your grandfather living on through you?
Well, first of all, I keep him alive as best as I can with my telling of his story. There are parts of me that I see did come from him. I always endeavor to try and see what I am physically made of. I appreciate the challenges of endurance and consistency, and I think that comes from him. He unwillingly put himself or found himself in a situation and managed to pull through, to quote Mark Twain. And I think that there's a part of me that also wants to see what am I made of? How tough am I? If I've put myself willingly into a situation, how much could I stand? And I think that that flows to me constantly. Always trying to learn how tough I am, and I think that that comes directly from him.
All right. So what was he most proud of, not as a survivor, but as a husband, father, grandfather, and man of faith?
What I think he was most proud of.
Yes, not as a survivor, but as a husband, a father, grandfather, and man of faith.
So I think it's an interesting question because I do remember that he said to me, it's interesting. He led a very fascinating life, and the one thing he ever told me that would make one feel extremely proud was to buy your own home. That was what he told me. He goes, nothing will make you feel like more of a man than buying and owning your old home. It means you saved, you made your decision, and you went for it. And there's nothing more valuable in the world actually than real estate. That it's an eternal value, and it doesn't fluctuate too wildly. Um, so so you set aside from the survival of the war, that was it. And I carefully listened. I bought my own house, actually twice. So I know twice what it's like to be a man. So my grandfather took pride in interesting things, and this was one of them. So it's curious, and I've actually revealed this answer to crowds and Q&A sessions, and they find it interesting that this is what he would choose. I am guessing, of everything else that he could advise and what he lived through, but I know him well enough to know that this would probably be one of his answers if the question was posed to him.
Okay, Martin. So what do you hope younger generations learn from Zaidy's work?
I hope that they understand and come to know and realize that hatred and marginalization of human beings leads to such things. We don't seem to have learned the lesson very well. There are people that are suffering all over the world because other people um, think they're superior or wish to dominate them. And World War II was supposed to teach the lesson that these things can happen in a world if we're not watchful enough. And in a world where too much of this happens, they're slaughtering Christians all over Africa, and the Pope doesn't say much. And they're slaughtering women all over Afghanistan, and they're slaughtering the Muslims in China, and they're slaughtering everywhere. And my job, the weight on my shoulder, is to be a voice saying this must stop, because this that I put in the pages between the two covers of this book is what can happen if we're not careful and if we're not on guard completely. We must make sure that the concept, that the slogan, that the idea of never again anywhere actually means something. And it's a personal life mission to make sure that this idea is heard as loud and as far and as spread as humanly possible.
Okay, thank you so much, Martin.
Sure.
Martin, after writing 14 books, why do you say this one may be your most important book?
Because the rest of what I wrote are silly. They're parodies. They're humor. It's fluffy stuff. But this one is the one that has the most gravity. It's the most serious, and I'm always brainstorming and trying to learn what it is that I can produce on such a scale. Right now, nothing as grand exists. So I think that this it could be my masterpiece. I don't know. I'd like to think it's a masterpiece. I hope it's got staying power. But because of its weight, it is my most important because it carries so much within it. It carries a message of world rebuilding in it, of survival, of spreading light into the darkness, and just that my grandfather was such an inspiring figure that I don't think I can match it. I certainly don't see so in the immediate future, but I could live a long time and I could write many works and perhaps something greater rests within me. But for now, I think this is a kind of a pinnacle for me, and I'm very proud that I feel this way. Yeah.
All right, Martin, thank you so much. This has been a very exciting episode. Thank you for sharing your grandfather's extraordinary story and for preserving a piece of history that might otherwise have been lost. Zaidy's War is more than a memoir, it is a testament to resilience, faith, perseverance, and the enduring power of family. On behalf of me and my audience, we wish you continued success with the book. And thank you for helping ensure that future generations never forget these remarkable stories. So Zaidi for so I said Zaidi. so so Martin, for those who want to connect with you and get your book, Zaidi's War, how can they do that?
Well, first of all, Dominic, thank you very much for a wonderful conversation, and thank you very much for having me on your show. It was a great evening having this conversation with you. And if anyone wants to reach out to me, discover some of my books, find themselves with Zaidy's War in their hands, they can drop by my website, which is martinbodekbooks.com. That's where I live and play and reside and keep things up to date as much as possible. So it's martinbodekbooks.com. Come check it out. Drop by. Have yourself a good time. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. My audience as well, make sure to check out Martin's work. Check it out and leave a review for him as well. I love you guys so much, and you guys are the reason why we are able to do this. If you need someone or you know someone who needs to hear stories about the World War II, make sure to share this episode with them. I will see you guys on the next episode. Bye, guys. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you very much. You have yourself a blessed day.
You too.